Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. As an entity began to suffer greatly, and I believe they dubbed him Slow Hand in the middle. But Eric Clapton's temper doesn't burn slowly. Beneath the silky licks and timeless songs is a musician who is infamous for both redefining blues, rock, and for having run afoul of some of the greatest names in music history. These weren't only variations in creativity. These were intense feuds driven by ego, betrayal, jealousy, and occasionally pure hatred. Clapton's simmering rage formed the undercurrent of rock's golden period, resulting in anything from backstage meltdowns and lasting resentments to stolen lovers and public insults. Some claim that as the rivalries grew more ugly, the riffs became sharper. A dispute that transformed a studio session into a battlefield is where it all started. The master of pop puppetry, Phil Collins. Being a pop star was never Eric Clapton's dream. He was a true blues musician, unfiltered, soulful, and gritty. However, Phil Collins attempted to change that perception in the glossy, synth-driven haze of the mid-1880s, and it almost caused Clapton to fall apart. Their partnership appeared good at first. Collins joined Clapton to create songs for the 1985 album Behind the Sun while he was at the pinnacle of his success with Genesis and a thriving solo career. He even contributed his trademark studio polish by playing drums on many tracks. It was a marketing dream come true for the record. Business. However, Clapton saw it as a creative and personal catastrophe. The radio-friendly mixes, the bright keyboards, and the slick production all ran counter to his musical soul. Clapton's own record made him feel alienated. He allegedly became enraged behind closed doors and told a buddy, "I felt like I was being packaged. I'm not like that. Never was." Tensions increased. Collins, who has always been a hitmaker, pushed for memorable arrangements that would top the charts. Clapton resisted every step, remaining true to his blues roots. The Clans' two butted heads were in the studio all the time, with Collins pushing for wider appeal and Clapton worried that he was selling out. Then came Live Aid, the huge event that was televised to millions of people worldwide in 1985. Collins and Clapton looked together on stage. Behind the scenes, a storm is building. Insiders said that the setlist caused a heated argument. Clapton desired raw, emotive, and profound blues cuts. Collins insisted on well-polished tracks that would astonish the viewers on televisions around the world. The pressure to fit in was oppressive. Later, Clapton would look back on this time with resentment, seeing it as a moment when he sacrificed his soul for chart success. Clapton discreetly withdrew from the spotlight to rediscover the music that had once defined him, while Collins rode the mainstream wave to greater stardom. They never really got back together. Many fans and blues purists accused Clapton of losing his authenticity as a result of the album's excessive production, which was criticized by critics. He would be plagued by the unpleasant taste of the entire encounter for years to come. Wait until you see what happens when Clapton is forced to play in a band with someone he can't even look at directly. If you thought the conflict over musical identity was intense, the drummer from Hell is Ginger Baker. Backstage was a slow-motion collapse waiting to happen, but on stage, Ginger Baker and Eric Clapton were pure fire. They created the sound that typified late 1960s rock as two-thirds of the renowned supergroup, Cream. Noisy, energetic, and rough. Their conflicts were as famous as their solos, and although their performances were amazing, so were their egos. Their relationship was unstable from the start. Although Clapton liked Baker's drumming skills, he didn't like the man. Baker, however, believed that Clapton was too willing to give in to business pressures and lacked self-control. The anxiety swiftly increased. Before a big show, Clapton once confided in a staff member, "I'll go or he'll go." That wasn't just idle chatter. He was prepared to move. The atmosphere was almost poisonous by the time Cream set out on their final tour in 1968. Baker and Clapton could hardly share a room. To keep the two from fighting, several sessions were recorded in completely different studios. The animosity lingered beneath the surface, even on stage. Mid-performance glares were exchanged, and throughout pauses, there were cold silences. Nevertheless, the group persisted, and strangely enough, their animosity might have contributed to the impact of their songs. Few bands could match the taut, electric edge that songs like White Room and Sunshine of Your Love had because of the anger and contempt that permeated their performance. Clapton, however, wanted nothing more to do with Baker after Cream officially broke up. For years, fans begged for a reunion, but Eric consistently turned down Ginger's requests. He described Baker as a nightmare in person form and a loose cannon in private talks. Insiders characterized the atmosphere as solely professional, even when they did perform together for a limited period of time in 2005. Two men putting up with one another out of nostalgia. No warmth, no humor. Never one to keep quiet, Baker subsequently asserted that Eric was afraid of me. He was aware that I was the superior musician. Although Clapton never responded to the remark in public, insiders said it further widened the gulf. Something epic had been born out of their cooperation. However, the price was an irreparably poisonous relationship. Eric encountered a man who not only disagreed with him, but also made fun of everything he stood for, just when you thought the musical tension could grow much colder. Frank Zappa, Weirdos, War. Frank Zappa was the heretic who arrived to destroy the blues rock tradition's top priest, if Eric Clapton was its high priest. Zappa flourished by subverting musical conventions. He was provocative, inventive, and unashamedly strange. He didn't consider Clapton's love of the blues to be artistic. Stasis was the result. In a frank interview in 1978, Zappa didn't mince words. Eric Clapton plays the guitar safely. There is no art, no danger. It was more than just criticism. Clapton's soul was the direct target of the insult. Already fed up with those who doubted his importance, Eric was incensed. Frank Zappa's music is just noise wrapped in ego, he allegedly told a friend. All of it is meaningless. However, this verbal battle was not new. For almost 10 years, their hostility had been simmering. Zappa reportedly insisted on performing just before Clapton at the 1969 Love and Peace Festival, understanding that his experimental, chaotic act would be nearly difficult to follow. Zappa smirked and said to the team, "Let's watch him continue after that." In private, Clapton was enraged yet calculating, refusing to fall for the ruse in public. Zappa didn't seem like a visionary to him. He was a guitar-wielding idiot. According to Clapton, Zappa's music was intentionally illogical and a mockery of musicianship rather than an original work. Zappa continued to prod the bear, though. He implied that Clapton had been using the same licks for 10 years when he ridiculed his solos in interviews as pentatonic exercises. Clapton responded by calling Zappa unlistenable, asserting that nobody he respected genuinely liked his songs. However, there was a deeper division underlying the barbs. Clapton supported emotion, heritage, and the unadulterated blues. Zappa was an advocate of breaking down barriers, reprogramming music completely, and demolishing structures. Their conflict went beyond simple personal animosity. It was ideological conflict, a little version of rock's conflict between Rebellion and Origins. Clapton kept quiet even after Zappa passed away in 1993. "I have nothing to say about him. That wouldn't be inappropriate," he allegedly said to a close friend. A chilly conclusion to a conflict that had never warmed up. The next feud, however, would rip straight through Clapton's personal life and leave him with unseen scars if Zappa's challenges were severe enough. Bloodstream Betrayal by Keith Richards. This one has it all. Ego, Doug's, treachery, and a woman who destroyed more than a friendship. Keith Richards and Eric Clapton were never close. However, when Clapton did something that even the most outrageous rock musicians couldn't handle, everything went completely haywire. He went for and eventually took Pattie Boyd, George Harrison's wife. Richards was incensed, not just horrified. He publicly questioned Clapton's devotion and moral compass, calling his actions a snake move. It was more than simply romanticism, to Keith. It has to do with friendship and honor. Clapton, in his opinion, had cracked the code. Not far behind, was the musical strain. Ever a blues purist, Clapton thought Richards' raw manner was sloppy and unfocused. According to reports, he referred to Keith's guitar work as a mess and lazy. In interviews, Richards retaliated by accusing Clapton of being overrated, predictable, and dull. Then the D-Rugs appeared. In the 1970s, both men were struggling with addiction, but rather than coming together over their common struggles, they turned against one another. Clapton was charged by Richards with using heroin as a cover. He is accused of telling a bandmate that Eric hides behind drugs. Not one to take things quietly, Clapton retaliated. For 20 years, Keith has been playing the same 5 riffs. They were caught in the crossfire, along with their mutual group of pals. Social gatherings had to be divided into 2 camps, at one point because things had gotten so nasty, one with Richards and one with Clapton. Producers and promoters discreetly ensured that they weren't scheduled for the same festivals. It was more than just stress. There was actual animosity. However, the resentment extended beyond little personal grievances. Always the rebel, Richards believed Clapton had sold out. Too sophisticated, too well planned. Richards was chaotic, unruly, untidy, and overrated in Clapton's opinion. Their rivalry, which had its roots in pride as well as treachery, was vicious, enduring, and intensely personal. 2 tales that will always circle one another in icy silence and clamped jaws. If betrayal and ego were the root causes of that fight, then something deeper was the source of the next, the crippling fear of being subordinated. Jimmy Page. He was unable to regain the crown. Once the undisputed guitar hero of Britain, Eric Clapton was revered as a god by both fans and graffiti artists. Then a man arrived who did more than simply challenge his throne. He destroyed it with fire. Jimmy Page was that man. Page revolutionized what it meant to be a guitar hero, with his booming riffs, violin bows, and dark mystique. Led Zeppelin was more than just a group. It was a force from myth. Clapton as well. He appeared out of date, outdated, and abandoned all of a sudden. Behind closed doors, the jealousy dwindled. During a replay session, one studio engineer recalled Clapton smirking. Jimmy uses studio methods to hide. Watch him perform that, live. Page, however, could perform it live and beyond. Zeppelin's albums dominated the charts. Arenas all over the world sold out throughout their tours. Clapton allegedly refused to read any articles that made a comparison between the two. As their legacy exploded, in his heart, he knew the truth. There was a change in the crown. Paul Samuel Smith, a former bandmate of the Yardbirds, put it succinctly and brutally. Jimmy turned the band Eric left behind into a legend that plagued him. The injury never fully recovered. Clapton made subtle jabs at Page in subsequent interviews, describing his sound as clever with effects but lacking soul. Or Page dismissed Clapton as a man mired in the past in her dismissive shrug. This went beyond a simple clash of fashions. The fight was for rock immortality. One held on to the traditional blues culture. Rock was propelled into an other, universe by the other. And the more Page ascended, the more Clapton felt eclipsed. It wasn't just competition, it turned into a fixation, a reminder that the man who was formerly referred to as God might be outperformed. However, the last rivalry not only undermined Clapton's self-esteem, but also destroyed his sense of self. The day Clapton lost his kingdom, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton was forever changed by what transpired on that electrifying evening in 1966. Being the dominant figure among British guitarists, he entered a smoke-filled club in London. He possessed the confidence, the praise, and the dignified moniker, God. However, Jimi Hendrix took the stage and changed the guitar's regulations in a single set while it was dark outside. Clapton was dumbfounded as he stood there. "It's over," Eric whispered to a buddy as Hendrix ripped through his performance, strumming behind his back with his teeth and literally and figuratively setting the strings on fire. "I'm done." He departed midway through, looking pale and shaken, according to a witness. The man who was revered for his slow, soulful bends had just witnessed the louder, faster, more unabashedly wild music of the future. Clapton had made blues purity the foundation of his world. It felt outdated because of Rick's. In private, Eric developed an obsession. He studied Jimi's licks, attempted to mimic his tones, and even worked on his stage persona. However, he adopted a different stance in public, rejecting Hendrix's genius as extravagant chatter. Another titan of the guitar industry, Pete Townshend, later stated it clearly. The loss of the throne was too much for Eric to bear, and he didn't. Clapton ceased going to Hendrix performances. According to pals, if Jimi came on, he would switch the radio station. It was a crisis rather than merely a rivalry. Not only had Chris outperformed him, but he had taken his post. Jimi's untimely death in 1970 caused global mourning among fans. Clapton, however, said nothing. Nothing. No homage. No remarks. Years later, he made an unexpected confession in a rare moment of candor. I was relieved. There had never been any verbal conflict. The harm was more profound than any headline, even though there were no interviews or diss tunes. Not only did Rick surpass Clapton, but he also destroyed the very reputation Eric had worked so hard to establish. And even though Rick's was no longer with us, his influence on Clapton remained. Because sometimes the most agonizing rivalries are those in which your worst adversary has never harbored animosity against you. These were more than merely rivalries. Clapton himself was reflected in them. His pride, his fears, and his quest for excellence. Every conflict exposed the man inside the legend of the untouchable guitar god. Proud, injured, and frequently at odds with his own mythology. Because the best solos ultimately originate from suffering. Furthermore, Clapton's suffering was expressed not just via lyrics, but also through strained friendships, resentful remarks, and music that reverberates with unresolved rage.